For you, LA, when I was watching Watchers 6, which was, I'm serious, I'm so jealous because it's that kind of documentary that I need. When I need a documentary fix, and I'm not kidding about this, I'm not saying this in jest, I want to see some guys really presenting something. And you guys go down to Peru. You're handling all of those elongated skulls. You guys are there amongst the rocks and the megalithic sculptures and walls, and it's like it's the real deal. And for you, what was it like? Because I know that you've been researching those skulls for a long time. What was it like to put your mitts on those and to handle those in person?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us on the show. Really appreciate it. But when Rick and I were down there in Paracas, Peru, and we walked into Senior Juan's museum, it's like all of a sudden we're there. And it's like, On the Trail of the Nephilim is an oversized book. It's like 8.5 by 11. So the pictures are really big. And we can read about stuff, but there's nothing like actually being in a place, feeling the Paracas breeze coming in off the ocean,
right?
Feeling the warmth of the sun, getting the smell of a locale, just the local people. And then I'm standing in the museum in front of this display case, and there's like 40 elongated skulls in there. Now, some of them are cradle headboard, but many of them are not, in our opinion. And it's just like, we're here. We're here. And then Brian Forrester took us out to the Chongos Necropolis, which was just unbelievable. I've been back there about 4 or 5 times now. I've walked pretty much the whole thing. There's a couple of areas I've yet to go to. There's a pyramid way, way, way in the distance. I haven't been to that one yet. But I've been all around the lower part of Chongos, up in the dunes and down and in the what we think is the remains of a village. There's still stones in the sand. And the Wakaros, the grave robbers, are continually ransacked the place. And
it's on private property, right?
Well, some of it is and some of it isn't. The pig farm is private property, which borders up against the reserve or the reservation, which is owned by the Peruvian government. We are in the process of attempting to get the proper archaeological permits to do a dig in the Chongos Necropolis. We feel no one's really done any research there since 1928. And we know that stuff is coming out of there all the time. And I'm not making this up. The last time I was there, I was with Brian Forrester, David Greenhill, a Peruvian archaeologist, a Peruvian Wakaro, an ex-grave robber, and Senior Juan Navarro, the curator of the Peruvian or the Paracas History Museum.
And the pilot, what was his name?
The pilot.
Okay, moving on.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank here.
I'm drawing a blank too. Okay, moving on.
But we were walking in the Chongos Necropolis.
Wait, are you talking about the pilot that flew us over the Nazca lines?
No, it's a whole different.
No, that's a whole nother crew. I'll get back to that. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So we're in Chongos, and we spent like 2 or 3 hours combing the place. We walked up and down these dunes in the middle of it's just so bleak and stark, this area. And we'd pretty much finished the exploration, didn't really see anything extraordinary. And, you were not allowed to dig there, obvious, for the, reasons of the Peruvian government will come and arrest you. So you're not allowed to dig, but we can walk through it, which is what we did. So we're walking out of the Chongos Necropolis, and I look over, and there's like something in the distance, and I kind of go, wow, that looks like a skull. But it's like, what's it doing there? It's just kind of lying in between 2 tire tracks. It's like, what? And I'm saying to myself, maybe it's just a Clorox bottle. So we're getting closer, and I'm going, that's a skull. And now we run up to the thing, and Brian Forrester takes one look at it and immediately runs up the hill. And we get there, and sure enough, it's an elongated skull. About 30 seconds later, Brian goes, guys, get up here. We run up the hill holding the skull, and there's a recent grave which has just been opened up, and he found 2 other skulls for a total of 3. They are all elongated, and the Wakaros, the grave robbers, got spooked about something.
Right.
And they just abandoned it and left everything there. So that was, and we took the skulls immediately. We were the Peruvian archaeologists, and we took them, and now they're registered at Senior Juan's museum. So that's, it's hands-on. It's there. Over the last week, I was back at an undisclosed location in a state in the Midwest on an open archaeological dig. And the archaeologist who was in charge of it, it was just the two of us. And we spent half of one day and a whole day of the next day doing a dig. And he's been on this dig for like 8 years. And I told him, I said, here we are, we're picking little bits of flint and bone, very small pieces of bone. I found a few pot shards, and lots of charcoal, and that's it. A couple of days later, after I left, he found some arrowheads. I said, when you're in Chongos and you look down at your feet, there's broken bits of pottery everywhere. You can find things like, oh, here's a Wari slingshot that's 1,000 years old.
Right.
Oh, here's the lower jawbone or a mandible of, who knows what. Richard and I were there last time. We're walking through the necropolis, and Richard comes up, and we had found 3 different skulls, one of which, and I got a great shot of Rick holding the skull, and it's just laying there in the sand.
In the sand, and I want to.
It's ironic. I'm just gonna say it's ironic that all these skulls are laying on the surface, and the only reason that they are is because of the Huayqueros. They go in and dig these graves up looking for
things of
that
value.
They can sell.
Right,
pieces of copper, gold, pottery, anything like that. And sometimes they actually find some stuff that's in perfect shape and still intact after 2,000 years, and they sell it for quite a bit of money, and they just toss the skulls on the ground. They don't care about them.
There's a scene in Watcher 6 that I want to paint the picture for our audience here. You guys are walking across. I'm assuming that Rick is the cameraman, okay? But L.A.
Yep.
and Brian are walking across the sand, literally tripping over bones. And you have to, and it seems to go to the horizon. And when Brian turns and he goes, oh man, it goes all the way over to there, and it goes all the way over. What? I've never found a femur lying in my backyard. I've never experienced what that would be like, finding human remains like that. But how did it affect you? Because it literally, you guys are tripping over skeletons. What was that like?
Well, for me, it was very sobering and a very somber moment.
Right.
Brian did not say anything about where we were going when he took us there. He just said we're going to Chongos, and it's a tomb. A lot of tombs here have been plundered since Columbus got there. So for 500 years, basically, the place has been plundered. Okay, we get that, but it doesn't prepare you for what you're about to see. And I remember walking up to the pyramid, and let me give you the backstory. There's a green belt. There's an underground river that flows down from the Andes, and everything is very green and lush. And there's lots of little acres or 2 acres or 5 acre parcels, all planted, and potatoes and corn and beans, and there's cattle moving in, and sheep and goats and herders and peasants, and it's just a whole scene. And it's like going back in time. And you step off the green belt, literally, and you're in the desert. And it's bleak, and it's stark, and it's nothing but sand as far as you can see. And I've never been in a place like that. And we started walking towards the remains of an Inca adobe pyramid. And as we got there, and I'm by myself at this point, Brian everybody's kind of off on their own. And I look down at my feet and I go, what's all these red things? And I bend down and I realize that these red things are in fact pottery shards. And the white things that are next to them are bone fragments. And at that point, it was like, you have got to be kidding.
Right.
And like you say, as we started exploring the necropolis, I realized that I'm walking, everywhere I walk, I'm walking on somebody's uncle, somebody's mom, somebody's dad, somebody's child. And it's disturbing.
Yeah, the look on your face, L.A., the look on your face, and when Brian started to disclose really where you guys were standing and what the reality of it was, you were in shock, and you could see. I could not imagine. And plus, you're a very religious guy, L.A., and so that sombering. I can't imagine when it's miles and miles of bones. And I don't want to play this down. It's just an amazing part of Watcher 6. I mean, you just have to stop and take pause and realize where you guys are at and what you guys are seeing. You're right there.
That graveyard is 7 miles wide, and that's the way it is there. I mean, it's just everywhere.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Hey, L.A., one of the things that is very impressive with you is you speak to both sides of the fence. I've seen many presentations that you have done in front of churches, and then the other side where you're in a ufology crowd. and you're accepted into both, and you manage to get the combination of both camps together and to meet in the middle. How do you fight that battle? Because you do. and when did you start to mesh the two together?
Well, I really come out of what you would call the New Age. I had a guru in my 20s, Guru Maharaji. My third eye was opened. I had meditation techniques which were taught. I experimented with psilocybin, mescaline, LSD, all that stuff. And this is in the 60s. This is like 40 some odd years ago.
Right.
I'm 63 years old, and this is the Beatles, and everyone's experimenting with this stuff, or a lot of people are experimenting. And for me, it was always to try to find out if there was a God, how could we possibly know him? And that's why when the guru came, I got the meditation techniques, and I went, oh my gosh, this is it. And it was definitely an experience. But after 3 years and getting into the inner circle, I realized how corrupt things were. And there was a lot of impropriety going on in sexual natures within the leadership, and just all sorts of stuff, just really weird stuff going on.
It wasn't what it was presented. It wasn't what you thought.
Is.
Right.
Never is. And so, I became an agnostic. I left when I was about 24, 25, and became an agnostic for 6 years. And I remember sitting in my room all alone, reading these Taylor Caldwell books. And then I got to a book by Dave Hunt, which is called The Cold Explosion, I believe. And at the end of that, it's a little prayer to ask Yeshua into your heart. And at this point, I'm all alone in my room. There's nobody around. There's nobody on TV yelling at me, asking for money. It's just me. And I just said, look, I don't know if you're real or not, because I was raised Catholic. I said, I don't know whether you're real or not, but if you are, come into my life and change it. And nothing happened. And about a month later, everything happened. And that's 34 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
34 years ago. My life has never been the same. And having been on both sides of the fence, the problem is, let me just cut to the chase, Jimmy. People equate Jesus or Yeshua, his real name, with the nonsense they see on the TV or the junk that they see in a lot of the churches. And there's a lot of, or let's say the youth group, where the youth minister is messing around with your 13-year-old daughter. All sorts of impropriety in the church. Stuff with money. Just turn on a lot of the religious broadcasting and watch these people ask you for your $1,000 seed faith offering, and on and on it goes. And it's like, when I became spirit-filled, which is 34 years ago, I remember turning on the TV and seeing these shows and going, but this isn't the Jesus I know. What is this? Why is this even here? And so I think, it's not about buildings and stained glass windows and funny haircuts and robes and rosaries and candles and stained glass and all this nonsense and popes and priests. All that's the invention of men. What happened 2,000 years ago was people actually had an experience, and that experience is available, and that's what happened today, and that's what happened to me 34 years ago. And that's changed my life. It continues to change my life. So I'm able to go, having been, let's say, in the New Age column, and gone to the second heaven and spirit guides and Carlos Castaneda dream quests and all that nonsense. Been there, done that. And all of a sudden, when I got connected 34 years ago, the disparity between that experience and every other experience was, I've already used the word, was disparate, was a disparity, a huge difference, a chasm between the two.
I'm looking here on Twitter. This question just came in. They're flying by. I'm going to grab this one real quick. It says, on LA site, you have a book about Psalm 83, nuke problem in Iran. So with your news about that, you heard about what's going on in Iran. They just had a little accident. What do you think? Yeah, an explosion. Oh. It's funny. It's downplayed. I'm sure it's a lot worse than what it is. What do you think about that?
Well, there are ancient prophetic texts, which are thousands of years old. And what's interesting, it's not like Nostradamus where the hit factor, let's say, is 80%. Well, he's 80% right. First of all, Nostradamus is about 60% right, and I'm being generous here.
Right.
Edgar Casey is more than actually less than that. And what we get is these ancient prophetic texts with 100% accuracy. They're thousands of years old. Some of them are as old as 3,000 years old. The Psalm 83, which is what your Twitter friend is referencing there, talks about a group of nations which go up against Israel. And there's a whole series of prophecies that actually are around Israel. The first, one of the most major ones, is the idea that Israel in the latter days, in the end times, would be regathered from the four corners of the earth and reestablished in her ancient homeland, which of course happened in 1949, when Israel becomes a nation in a day. The United Nations vote, and bam, Israel becomes a nation, and she's immediately attacked by her Arab neighbors, and the rest is history. And here we are today in 2014, and exactly the same thing is happening. But this sets the prophetic time clock ticking. And the Psalm 83 war, I believe we're actually looking at the nascent beginnings of that. Let me elaborate here real quickly.
Yeah, please.
Richard just talked about Hamas and the war with Hamas. When we look at Hamas's charter, first of all, in their charter, they call for the complete and utter annihilation and destruction of the Israeli state. So Hamas poses an existential threat to the nation of Israel. Hezbollah in the north, basically their charter says exactly the same thing. Hezbollah now has at least 100,000 rockets. I'm being conservative. Some people place that at more like 150,000 rockets. Many of these have been upgraded, so they're not the Katyusha firecrackers, which are wildly inaccurate. They've been upgraded, and Hamas is, again, trenching in. Now we've got ISIL on the east. The only buffer that Israel has is Jordan, and unless the Jordanian king grows a pair and starts to do something, I predict that Jordan will fall very quickly. Wow. Very quickly, because ISIL's going after the whole thing. And their name is ISIL. It's not IS. It's ISIL. That's what they started out with. You can change it and tap dance around it all you want. That name stands for Islamic State of Iraq, Syria, Iraq, Syria, and the Levant. ISIL. That's what originally it was. And the Levant, of course, includes Israel. And Israel's well aware of this. So Israel is surrounded by those who pose an existential threat. If we factor Iran in there, I've just upped the ante. But back Iran off, because that's a separate deal. All those nations I just mentioned are Arab. The Iranians are not. The Iranians are not Arabs. But the other ones are, Hezbollah, Hamas, and ISIL. And I think that this is setting up the Psalm 83 war. Israel will have no other choice but to really cut the heads off the snakes of Hezbollah, Hamas, and ISIL. And when it does, it will expand its territory, just like the Psalm 83 war tells us it will. That's what's coming. They can't live like this. They can't live with Hezbollah lobbing rockets over at will and Hamas doing the same thing. They have got to go in and clean house. It's the only. Richard was just over there. He can tell you. These people do not want peace. They want the destruction of Israel, period.
Well, I stood on Highway 232, which is right next to a kibbutz, about 2 miles from the Gaza Strip, and they had cement barricades up in a field where they were growing wheat, or were, and it was to keep Hamas from sending rockets over into the kibbutz across the street, because a couple years earlier they had targeted a school bus on Highway 232 and killed a child using an anti-tank missile.
Mm-hmm.
And so Hamas is targeting kindergartens, buses, anything that they can get to really strike terror. In fact, some of the tunnels that they had planned were actually coming up in under an eating area in one of the kibbutz on the Israel side of the border, where they were going to try to do a sneak attack. The tunnel was full of drugs to drug people. They had plastic handcuffs, and they were going to take hostages and drug them and pull them back into the tunnel. That's what Israel's dealing with. So there's a whole story that's going to be in the Torah Code film about that. But I mean, that's really what's going on over there. And meanwhile, the people of Israel, when you actually go there and meet these people and listen to their stories, are the kindest people on earth. Oh, are you hungry? Come in. We're making pizza. I mean, that's the kind of thing it is. No one acts like anything has happened, even though every few feet there they have these little bomb shelters that if there's an air raid siren, you can run and jump into one of those. Each one of them holds about 15 people, and they're hardened concrete. And then they have a kindergarten room that is hardened. It's an anti-missile area because those buildings have been targeted by Hamas.
As a parent, I just can't fathom that. With my kid, I just can't imagine. One thing I wanted to point out with everybody, I've held that piece of the Hamas rocket in my own two hands. And one of the things that struck me, and I'm sure, L.A., you have the same comment, was this is handmade, machined, like with care. It is an amazing piece of machinery. The way the screws are set, you can tell that somebody somewhere is making this stuff with bad intentions. It is well made, well crafted, with bad intentions.
That particular one you saw, Jimmy, is not the average Hamas rocket. Most of them are much more primitive than that. That one probably came from Syria or Iran. And the other ones are made out of pipe, irrigation pipe, which coincidentally Israel donated to the Palestinians to irrigate their crops. And Hamas has instead taken that pipe and threaded it and made it into rockets. And I've got pieces of a couple of those too.
Right.
Where you can really see the difference.
I mean, it's just scary. It just doesn't look slapped together, is what I'm saying. This is some serious technology.
Some of them, the one that you saw was the base of a nose cone, and the nose cone has like a little counterweight in it that wiggles. So when it's flying, it helps stabilize it in flight. And that's just a piece of it. And the nose cone's kind of a long black plastic part that snaps onto it, and those screws actually bolt it on.
Hey, L.A., is it Nephilim or Nephilim?
Well, there's a bunch of different pronunciations.
Yeah.
My mentor, Dr. I.D. Thomas, would pronounce it Nephilim. Nephilim. That's how he would pronounce it. I didn't know that pronunciation. I pronounced it Nephilim. And a lot of other people pronounce it Nephilim, Nephilim. I guess that's about it.
So
Nephilim.
So I say Nephilim. And
I do too.
Okay, so Nephilim. Okay.
Some people pronounce it Nephilim.
Yes. I've heard so many different versions, and I just don't want to sound like a doofus. So Nephilim is comfortable for me. So can we go with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I think I'm starting to feel today, not only, and you guys bring this up in Watcher 6, or is it 7? I think it's 7 when you guys talk about
7's the UFO piece.
Yeah, the Vatican. And so do you feel, because I feel this, and I talk to a lot of researchers, that could Jesus have been misrepresented? Could Jesus have been an ET? And not only that, angels in general. I mean, everything seems to come from the sky and come down.
Well, in the classic sense, yes. And I know I'm gonna get flack on this, but wait a minute, what are you talking about?
Yeah, me too. I'm trying to tiptoe through this.
Well, I mean, it's true. An angelic being is, in the classic sense, an extraterrestrial. They're not from here. Therefore, they are, by definition, an extraterrestrial. But it's not the way people think. They're not ET in the sense of coming from Zeta Reticuli. They're interdimensional. One of the fathers of ufology, discusses this and talks about this. The idea that these are actual interdimensional beings. Jacques Vallée, for instance, in his book Messengers of Deception, says, I don't think they're really from some other planet. They appear to be interdimensional. That's what we believe that they are. They're interdimensional. When Yeshua incarnated here, see, here's the deal. People go, well, Jesus must be an ET because he could do this, 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 and this. There's so many prophecies that talk about the first coming. There's a gazillion prophecies talking about the second coming. But all this is like, it's literally, what people don't understand is we're in the midst of this cosmic war that has been raging in an unseen dimension, literally for millennia, and from time to time spills out on this planet and does so in very graphic, dramatic ways. And this heavenly war is between these two different sides. And the bad guys are incredibly nefarious and highly malevolent. They are wicked, literally. The good guys show up too. And we see all this stuff beginning to manifest in ways that I've never seen it. The whole ET thing falls, let me back up here real quick. When we look at Darwinism, Darwinism tells us that everything just happened by chance. All this, there is no supernatural. There's nothing it's all random. Life really has no meaning other than to reproduce and continue the species. That's it. And even that has really no meaning. All this stuff and reductionism, love, emotions, all this are just combinations of chemicals. Well, I counter that with saying, well, that's interesting, but then tell yourself that you really don't love your wife tonight.
Right.
Tell yourself that. I mean, the whole argument just falls on its own weight.
Right.
But I digress. The bottom line is this: Darwinism sets up an intellectual vacuum. Where did we come from? Where were we created? When Ben Stein in his movie Expelled, which is, if you haven't seen it, rent it. Ben Stein sits down with one of the premier evolutionists of the 20th, 21st century, Richard Dawkins, and asks him a very simple question. Where did the first self-replicating molecule come from?
Exactly.
And Dawkins has no answer.
He doesn't. That's a great, as far as documentary goes, that moment there
is very telling.
Very telling.
And Dawkins is very upset by that, and you can see his body language. Well, I told you no.
He's totally
Stop
the cameras. Yes.
He's ticked off.
Yes.
And so Stein throws him a lifeline. Well, how do you think it could have happened? And this is what he believes. This is his core values coming out in a moment. This is pure honesty. And I'm sorry for the guy. This is all he's got. Well, it could have happened in this way. I quote, maybe in another place in the galaxy, a race of beings who had to evolve to a very high state by some sort of Darwinian process, created us in a lab, and then fired us through the universe, panspermia. We landed on this planet which was suitable for life, and presto changeo, here we are. That's all he's got. That's all he's got, which is basically circular reasoning because, well, where did they come from? And when we contrast that with what the biblical narrative says, that all things were created through Yeshua, he spoke everything into existence. And so it's like, okay, well, you say, well, you got to have faith to believe that. Okay, fine. But you got to have the same amount of faith, in fact, even more so, to believe what Dawkins is selling, because he's just making it up as he goes along. And what we've got in the biblical narrative is thousands of prophecies which talk about the first advent of Messiah coming to set everything straight. And that's what happens. Everywhere he walks when he's here, everything he does is just amazing. You can't argue with that. You can argue about the church all you want, but you can't argue about him and what he does. Everybody gets healed. The works of the fallen one, the wicked one, people who are demon-possessed become set free.
Right.
People that are born blind. You say, well, the people are just writing that down. Well, the same stuff is happening in China and in other places. And we've experienced it in Watchers, and we actually talk about it in Watchers 8. We've experienced some of that warfare. And so we know it's real. I mean, look, I'm not making this up. We experienced it, and we documented it in Watchers 8. What happened there was absolutely unprecedented. It was unbelievable. And we can get into that if you want to.
Well, tomorrow
also,
night.
if I can add to that discussion a bit, Jimmy.
Yes.
When you're talking about is Jesus an ET, what's getting back to your original question, I mean, I think that because of the knowledge that we've been getting by talking to people who've been abducted, we know that the phenomena is real.
Yep.
People aren't making this stuff up. A lot of them have implants. You get x-rays and you can see that they've had something inserted into the center of their brain, into their various, their wrists, their toes, their ankles. I mean, these things are physical objects that are actually there, but it also tends to peel the veil back a little bit when you talk about a virgin birth experience, that I believe it's possible, and I'm not trying to be blasphemous here, but just to try to understand what actually was going on with the birth of Christ. Not that he was birthed by an ET, but that we know now that there is something going on as far as the breeding program that Dr. David Jacobs relates in Watchers 7, that where people are being taken and implanted and end up getting pregnant from that. And, we don't know exactly how it happened. The scriptures really don't elaborate on it. But there are other references in the Tanakh, in the book of Daniel and in the book of Ezekiel, where it talks about what sure looks to me like they're trying to describe some kind of craft.
Well, let's back up for a second. And it's not really what the show is about. I don't really talk about religion, but let's clear up Jimmy's mind on a couple of things. and LA is one of the most read guys when it comes to the scripture, and I see him speak. I can't imagine getting up and speaking to a church, because you got to have your ducks in a row. You got to know what you're talking about. So let me back up. The one thing that when it comes to Jesus himself, is one of the I'm not comfortable with is we don't have any from the period, anything that speaks about Jesus, the man or the prophet or the Messiah from the period. Everything seems to have happened 50 and 100 years later in the books. So how do you get around that, L.A.?
Well, that's really not true. We've got a lot of fragments from the first century. Basically what we've got is he's there, and these people, something's happening to their lives. Something dramatic is happening. And they're writing their accounts down. And again, we've got fragments from the first century, a lot of fragments, and partial gospels, partial letters. I mean, it's all there. And I will cede you that, the full manuscripts don't come in till later, but we've got the fragments. And the thing is,
that Paul was later too.
Paul, yeah. But everybody's writing within that, and the apostles, those guys that hung out with them, they're just a bunch of goofballs, really. And I'm not trying to be, as Richard said, blasphemous. They're just a bunch of goofballs. They're just a bunch of guys, fishermen from Galilee. And they're men with really, no education per se. But they've hung out with this guy, Jesus, for 3 years, and their lives change. And their lives change dramatically. And eventually, they literally turned Western civilization on its head. It changed everything, to the point where even the calendar talks about the birth. Everything now is, BC and AD. I mean, that's how it was for, a long, long time, hundreds and hundreds of years. The bottom line is this, that if there wasn't an experience that changed people's lives, then as Paul says later, if the resurrection really didn't happen, if he really didn't rise from the dead, then all this is just a big joke. We might as well just eat, drink, and be merry, for who cares? But the promise is eternal life. That's what's missed. People don't really talk about this so much. I don't know why, because this is the the crux of the deal. If you can just put it down and reduce it into those terms, the deal is this: we believe on him who was sent. Who was sent? Yeshua. And then we believe that, okay, we screw up, we got all this stuff that we do, a lot of stuff that we do which isn't really cool, and when we ask to have him take that from us and to forgive us, he'll do that. For that, we get eternal life. That's how it works. And things begin to change. The Spirit of a living God then comes upon us. This was done all through for thousands of years in the Old Testament. The prophets and stuff talk about all that. The whole thing happens is different from when Yeshua comes, and after he resurrects from the dead, everything's changed. And folks, I'm not talking religion here. You know, and a lot of you have been hurt by the church, and I'd like to take a moment to apologize for those of you who have been really hurt by the church. And I'm sorry that you were. But this is really real. It's the most real thing I've ever been involved in. It's a daily walk, and I'm constantly learning and constantly growing. I'm amazed at how prophecy is being fulfilled right in front of us, which everything ties back to his words. Let me just close by saying this. He warns us, Yeshua warns us, that before he returns, there'll be wars and rumors of wars, famines, pestilence like Ebola, earthquakes in diverse places and troublesome times. 2,000 years ago, there's no way to map earthquakes in diverse places. If you were in Jerusalem and an earthquake happened in Japan, you wouldn't know about it. Now my iPhone rings.
Right.
Now we watch it on satellite TV as the tsunami comes in a half an hour after the earthquake, and the helicopters are up there filming the thing, bouncing it off the satellites, and we're here in America in our living rooms watching the tsunami devastate the coastline of Fukushima. Unprecedented.
With the Nephilim, okay, let's change gears a little bit. I have you know what? I have one more comment on that subject. When I'm a black and white guy, very much a black and white guy, I think there's a lot of proof of when we deal with skeptics out there, and three of us were talking about this earlier today. When you deal with skeptics out there, it frustrates me, because one of the things that we do have is we have a lot of evidence, not only with abduction and eyewitness testimony, but there's plenty of video and sightings and the hundreds of thousands of images that are all over the planet. So we have plenty of evidence. But when it comes to the Romans and Jesus during that period, the Romans who had so much, everything was documented, prisoners and crops and banking, and everything was documented. And when it comes to Jesus, they didn't document his presence there. Nothing is in writing. How do we explain that away? Or is that just something that we have to take on faith?
Well, there are some extra biblical texts which actually talk about that. Josephus, for one, actually mentions Yeshua and mentions the crucifixion. There also are, Roman paperwork, for lack of a better word, but there are Roman documents that talk about, the crucifixion and the rumors of the resurrection. I mean, they talk about this and how this new sect sprung up from this man who supposedly rose from the dead. I mean, that's all part of the historical record, so it is there. It's just that it's not widely spread around. People don't talk about it. I know about it, and I've read those accounts. They're fascinating. The Gospels are fascinating. The Gospel just means good news, because, again, look, all I know is this. All these prophecies written thousands of years ago, and then he shows up, the prophecies are fulfilled, and now we're in the period of time where these ancient prophecies written thousands of years ago are beginning to herald the second coming. And, I mean, I guess a lot of people can have a real twisted image of who he is, and he's the most amazing, God-man I've ever come in contact with. And I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. I mean, it's absolutely incredible when we read the accounts, and then when he becomes alive and he begins to communicate, and he communicates with me. And what I mean, and that sounds really wacky, and I know that, but the Spirit of a living God indwells in the believer, and the Spirit of a living God can instruct us. That's scriptural. It says the Spirit will come and teach you all things. And as we yield ourselves to that, we're taught. And it's a lifelong experience. And as we walk, we learn to distinguish his voice, and we learn to distinguish the voice of the fallen one. And again, going back into spiritual warfare, that's something that I'm constantly engaged in. I'm basically in warfare mode pretty much all the time because of what's going on the planet. And because of what Richard and I do, not only in Watchers, but in the books that I write, we're exposing all this, and that the dark forces do not want it out. They really don't. And so there's a lot of spiritual warfare. Watchers 8 documents that, which is absolutely, it's a first as far as I know. It's just a first. What happened in that operating theater was just profound, astounding, and unprecedented.
So let's start here. Who were the Nephilim?
The Nephilim are the byproduct, or the progeny from the unholy union of the fallen angelic host and the women of earth. Fallen angels having sex with the women, and the offspring becomes a hybrid being known as the Nephilim or the Nephilim. That's what they are. And in the old days, before the flood of Noah, they were giants. They were huge. I mean, really big. Later on, after the flood, they're not as big. And then now we're starting to believe that there's genetic manipulation in the many different tribes of the Nephilim that we see. And everything from giants 9, 10, 11, 12 feet, some of which we find in the Americas, and then normal sized entities like we see in Paracas, but then we've got the elongated skulls, which don't really fit. And preliminary testing, DNA testing, was done on some of those skulls by the late Lloyd Pye, when I've spoken to the geneticist, and basically they said that the segments of the mitochondrial DNA did not match anything in the genome. It's not human, which is exactly what we would expect to see if we had an outside agency manipulating the genome, the gene pool.
Yeah, it's actually some kind of hybrid.
Where did the DNA come from? I mean, are we talking out there? Was it here? Was it a separate species that was combined? Or are we talking about some type of celestial ET injection into the DNA? Guys?
I'm still here.
I'm sorry. Not. I keep hitting my mute button. Sorry about that accident. Not in the classic ET sense. I would say this, that what we're looking at is the fallen angelic host of heaven, which continually screws around with the genome, trying to make man or create man in their image rather than the image of the Most High God. And so we get these hybrid beings, and the Bible is full of it if you know where to look. It talks about, look, Noah, the movie, came out this year, and it had nothing to do with what's written. Absolutely nothing. It's a complete rewrite of the story. And it made Noah made Noah out like a homicidal maniac. I mean, and the God of the Bible is some weird deal. And the fallen angels were these rock people. I mean, everything was wacky. It had nothing to do with anything. And what people don't understand was there's a cosmic chess match going on here. The reason why the fallen angels come and the reason why the hybrids are being made is to wipe out the human genome. And if the fallen one can do that, it's game over, checkmate, I win. That's what's at stake. And that's why in the text, God says, Noah, you, your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives, that's a vetting process. That's a vetting process, and he says it twice. And it says Noah is pure in all his generations. What that means is Noah is not contaminated by any type of Nephilim or fallen angelic blood or DNA. He's not corrupted his gene pool. So everything gets wiped out. Read the book of Enoch. Richard and I have had long, long discussions about the book of Enoch, which amplifies this whole scenario which is going on in the days of Noah. The Nephilim at one point became so cannibalistic, they would eat and drink the flesh and blood of human beings. They became absolutely bizarre. And it says that the spirits, the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim are now earthbound, and they are what I would consider demonic entities, and they hate the human race. And any of you out there who have ever encountered a demon know exactly what I'm talking about. They are wicked, they are evil, and they are highly malevolent, and they hate human beings.